It was late Tuesday night when my phone chimed. It was a voice message from my daughter-in-law, Chloe, but it was meant for my son, Ethan. I almost deleted it, but something, maybe fate, made me press play. What I heard wasn't sweet. It was a cold, calculated plan to empty my husband's estate. She whispered, "The old lady is finally signing the papers tomorrow. We're rich, baby. Just don't let her change her mind about the nursing home." Hello, I'm Martha. I'm 65 years old and my life has always been characterized by prudence and forward thinking. I retired 2 years ago after a long, successful career as a certified financial planner. My professional life was built on trust, meticulous detail, and protecting my clients' assets, skills that now tragically I must use to protect my own. My husband Robert passed away suddenly just 6 months ago. His death left a profound void, but also a complex financial situation involving a large estate and several properties. Robert and I always believed in caring for our family, but we also believed in planning for all contingencies, which is why his assets are held in a comprehensive but somewhat complicated trust structure. We have one son, Ethan, who is 35. Ethan is a good but easily swayed man who works in sales. He is utterly devoted to his wife, Chloe, my daughter-in-law, who is 32. Chloe works as a freelance consultant and is very charismatic, a trait I always found a little too polished. I saw myself as transitioning into the role of a supportive retired matriarch, focused on finalizing Robert's estate and securing my future. My health is excellent, and my mind is sharp. The primary task ahead was signing the final paperwork to transfer certain non-liquid assets into my revocable trust, a final step I had delayed due to grief. I trusted Ethan implicitly to support me through this process. I never ever imagined the danger lay not in the paperwork itself, but in the hands of the person I allowed closest to my son. My professional life as a financial planner instilled in me a deep-seated reverence for control and prediction. Growing up, my family experienced a sudden, devastating financial collapse due to a failed investment, leaving us near destitute. That trauma taught me that financial security is the ultimate shield against chaos and vulnerability. Since then, I viewed emotional attachments with skepticism, preferring the concrete logic of balance sheets. This made me meticulous, but also perhaps overly cautious and slightly suspicious of overt displays of affection, particularly when money was involved. Losing Robert 6 months ago was the biggest emotional shock of my life. He was my anchor, the one person whose integrity I never questioned. His death threw my meticulously organized world into profound disarray. In the aftermath, I leaned heavily on Ethan and Chloe needing the emotional connection they offered, even if I was careful about the financial details. My grief made me profoundly vulnerable for the first time in decades. I've always struggled with my relationship with Chloe. She is exceptionally charming, often bordering on manipulative. While she treated me with surface-level sweetness, I sensed a constant calculating nature behind her bright eyes. I often found myself observing her, my gaze lingering, looking for cracks in her perfect facade. I'd notice her expression would flicker when I discussed the value of certain properties, a fleeting look of intense, perhaps covetous interest. I'd catch myself tapping my fingers nervously, a sign of my internal alarm whenever she asked specific questions about the trust disbursement schedules. My greatest fear, born from my childhood trauma, is helplessness, specifically losing control of my assets and being dependent on others. Robert's final trust documents required my signature to finalize the transfer of the most valuable assets into my personal revocable trust, safeguarding them for my lifetime. I had been delaying this final step due to emotional fatigue, trusting Ethan and Chloe to manage the external affairs of the estate. This delay, coupled with my recent emotional vulnerability, created the perfect opening for their plot. I thought I was simply grieving with my family, allowing myself to be cared for. In reality, I was the target, and my vulnerability was the asset they were trying to liquidate. The shock of the voice memo wouldn't just be the betrayal. It would be the terrifying confirmation of my deepest fear that my own son and his wife were actively planning to seize my assets and dispose of me, turning my grief into my ruin. In the 6 months following Robert's death, my daily life revolved around a fragile state of managed grief, heavily influenced by Ethan and Chloe's constant presence. They moved into the guest suite of my large house almost immediately, ostensibly, to help me through this difficult time. This arrangement suited my immediate need for companionship, but it also placed them directly within reach of Robert's extensive financial files. The atmosphere in the house was deceptively intimate and cozy. Chloe was relentless in her displays of nurturing care. She prepared all my meals, ensuring I ate healthy portions, and frequently gave me lengthy shoulder massages. She would hold my hand tightly as we watched television, her expression one of deep, solicitous concern. She seemed genuinely devoted to my well-being, reinforcing the comforting but ultimately false sense of harmony. I remember one afternoon distinctly. I was reviewing the trust documents, and Chloe brought me tea. She sat beside me, her gaze sweeping over the complex legal jargon. "Don't stress yourself, Mom," she said sweetly, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "Just focus on healing. Ethan and I will take care of everything else." This scene, which I interpreted as loving support, now feels like a highly polished performance designed to maintain my trust and keep me distracted. Ethan, my son, exhibited his typical passivity, acting as Chloe's agreeable second. He would constantly repeat her suggestions that I should slow down, that I shouldn't worry about the tedious paperwork, and that the estate lawyer should just deal with the final transfers quickly. He seemed genuinely concerned about my stress levels, reinforcing the narrative that they were acting in my best interest. My key task, which I had delayed, was meeting the lawyer tomorrow to sign the final documents transferring Robert's commercial real estate properties into my revocable trust. This move would legally protect those assets from any immediate probate claims, securing my lifelong income. I trusted Ethan to drive me to the lawyer's office. This upcoming appointment formed the crucial ticking deadline that made Chloe's eventual voice message so terrifyingly relevant. In the house was one of profound trust, a trust that I, the financial planner, had foolishly allowed to override my professional skepticism due to my intents. I was in a state of emotional vulnerability, believing my son and daughter-in-law were my protectors, while they were in fact closing in on the final phase of their calculated financial scheme. The conflict began not with a confrontation, but with a jarring mechanical error. It was 10 p.m. I was alone in my study, trying to read, but mostly just staring at the silent phone on the desk. It chimed with a notification, a voice message from Chloe. My first thought was annoyance. Why wasn't she texting? I almost deleted it, thinking it was a mundane update. My hands were already reaching for the delete button, but the little pulsing icon caught my gaze. I pressed play. The voice was Chloe's, but it was low, conspiratorial, and entirely devoid of the sweet, soothing tone she used with me. The message was clearly meant for Ethan, based on her hushed, intimate delivery. "The old lady is finally signing the papers tomorrow," she whispered, a chilling undercurrent of excitement in her voice. "I made sure she slept well tonight. No more crying spells. We're rich, baby. Just don't let her change her mind about the nursing home." The words hit me like a physical blow. The phrase "the old lady" was a cruel, cutting shock, but it was the combination of rich baby and nursing home that ripped the serene veil from my eyes. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about theft and abandonment. They weren't waiting for the natural course of the trust. They were celebrating the immediate transfer of assets into my revocable trust, the very thing I was doing to protect my income, because they had a plan to seize control of that trust immediately after. They were celebrating my scheduled legal appointment as their moment of triumph. My body went instantly cold, rigid with shock. My financial planner's mind snapped out of its grief-induced fog and into full defensive mode. Every small, seemingly loving action Chloe had performed over the past 6 months, the tease the massages, the discouraging me from reading the complex paperwork replayed in my head, colored now by her true venomous intent. I saw the calculated nature of her expression when discussing property values. I understood the purpose of Ethan's passivity. He was the distraction, the soft shield hiding her sharp ambition. I played the message again, my eyes squeezed shut, needing to confirm the absolute horror. The final damning piece was the mention of the nursing home. They weren't just taking the money. They were planning my swift, involuntary removal from my own life and home. They were leveraging my temporary vulnerability and my son's fiduciary role to liquidate my future and dispose of me. My deepest childhood fear of helplessness had materialized, orchestrated by my own family. The intense shock gave way to a cold, crystalline fury. There were no tears, no hysterics. My emotions were channeled into a single, razor-sharp focus. I sat back, the phone still warm in my hand. I was a financial planner who had just discovered a massive internal fraud. I knew exactly what steps to take. The conflict was no longer emotional. It was a hostile takeover, and I was preparing the counterattack. The signing appointment tomorrow was not going to be their victory. It was going to be the site of their ambush. My face set in the hardest expression. I owned the face of a professional who was about to audit a liar. The voice message was my turning point. The point where grief ended and war began. I spent the next 2 hours in my study, not sleeping, but meticulously planning the ambush. I downloaded the audio file, secured my financial passwords, and called my estate lawyer, Mr. Hayes. I did not mention the voice message on the phone. I simply stated in a clear, measured voice that I needed him to bring a specific, unalterable document to the signing tomorrow, one that he had drafted months ago, and to ensure the firm's senior partner was also present. The next morning, the day of their planned triumph, was the scene of the emotional explosion. Ethan and Chloe were sickeningly cheerful. Chloe brought me coffee, kissing my forehead with that nauseatingly sweet expression. "Ready for a big day, Mom? Just sign the papers and you can relax," she chirped. My gaze met hers, and though she saw a tired elderly woman, I saw a predator, and I felt nothing but ice. Ethan drove us to Mr. Hayes' office. I sat silently in the back seat, observing Ethan's jittery excitement, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, his passive obedience now manifesting as nervous energy. He was complicit, but clearly terrified of Chloe's ambition. In the lawyer's opulent conference room, everything was set. Mr. Hayes, his senior partner, myself, Ethan, and Chloe. The lawyer laid out the documents for the transfer into my revocable trust. Chloe looked smug. Ethan looked relieved. Before we sign, I began, my voice clear and resonating in the quiet room. I have one small piece of evidence that needs to be officially logged into the record pertaining to the beneficiary's intent. Chloe's face instantly flashed with confusion. Ethan looked at her, his eyes wide with panic. "It's nothing, Mom," Ethan stammered, reaching for my hand. "Let's just sign and go." "Oh, it's everything, Ethan," I corrected him calmly. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. My lawyer nodded subtly. I hit play. The room filled with Chloe's low conspiratorial whisper. "The old lady is finally signing the papers tomorrow. We're rich, baby. Just don't let her change her mind about the nursing home." The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Chloe's expression went from confusion to a mask of absolute paralyzing horror. She lunged for the phone, but the table was too wide. "That's illegal! You can't record me!" she shrieked, her voice shattering her sweet facade. Ethan, however, didn't look at the phone or Chloe. He looked at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of shame, disbelief, and agony. His body language collapsed inward, his shoulders slumping. He was trapped between his mother and his manipulative wife, and the evidence was irrefutable. You said nursing home? I asked, my voice rising slightly, directed at Ethan. You were celebrating my financial ruin and my institutionalization while I was recovering from the grief of your father's death. The silence that followed was deafening. The emotional explosion wasn't mine. It was theirs, the realization that their carefully executed plan had not only failed, but had provided me with the ultimate damning proof of their treachery. I turned to the lawyers, both of whom were watching the scene with cold professionalism. Mr. Hayes, please substitute the document on the table with the one I requested. We are not proceeding with the transfer to my revocable trust. We are signing the documents establishing the irrevocable testamentary spendthrift trust for the remainder of the estate assets, ensuring that Ethan receives only a managed income for life, and neither he nor his wife will ever have direct access to the principal. I had used their betrayal to secure my future and simultaneously ensure their absolute financial incapacitation. The look of utter devastation on Chloe's face, the true loss of their ill-gotten fortune, was the moment the balance shifted entirely in my favor. The battle had been won. The dramatic scene in the lawyer's office was merely the catalyst. The true justice building began immediately after the signing of the new irrevocable trust documents. I left Ethan and Chloe in the conference room with Mr. Hayes, who was busy explaining the sudden devastating limitations of the new spendthrift trust, a task I felt he handled with gratifying severity. I walked out, phone in hand, and initiated the next phase of my counterattack. My first priority was removing the threat from my home and ensuring the legal foundation was ironclad. I instructed Mr. Hayes to immediately draft a formal notice. This document served three purposes. First, to notify Ethan and Chloe that the transfer of the most valuable assets, the commercial properties, was now secured in an irrevocable trust where the principal was inaccessible to them. Second, to formally request their immediate vacating of my premises, the guest suite. And third, to formally notify them that any attempt to contest the new trust structure would be countered with a lawsuit citing conspiracy to commit elder abuse and financial fraud, referencing the voice message as proof of felonious intent. My emotions were cold and calculating. There was no room for maternal softness. Before returning home, I ensured the voice message was not only secured in my lawyer's files, but also uploaded to a secure encrypted cloud server. I also had the audio professionally transcribed and notarized. This evidence was the ultimate weapon, ensuring that even if they tried to claim the recording was fabricated, the notarized transcription confirmed their malicious intent. I felt a powerful stabilizing tension, the energy of a predator who had just successfully trapped her prey. I returned home to find Ethan frantically packing their belongings. Chloe was not present. She had stormed out of the law office, recognizing the absolute failure of their plan. Ethan's face was a wreck of shame and panic. He tried to apologize, his body language supplicating, his eyes swollen with tears. "Mom, please." "It was Chloe. She pressured me. I didn't mean to put you in a home." I stopped him with a raised hand. "Silence, Ethan. Your father and I taught you better. You chose convenience over morality. You chose greed over my security. I heard you celebrating my institutionalization. You are 35 years old. You are not a victim of pressure. You are an adult who committed a profound breach of fiduciary trust and a moral failure." My gaze was unwavering. I allowed no room for his excuses. This was necessary to ensure he understood the gravity of his actions. I immediately changed the locks on the main house and deactivated the security codes. They knew Chloe's frantic texts to Ethan were cut off when I insisted he find temporary accommodation, effectively isolating them from each other and from my assets. The new spendthrift trust was designed so that Ethan's small managed income was paid out only if he maintained gainful employment and was not subject to any marital or legal claims by Chloe. This cutting of financial access was designed to force both of them to work independently and to prevent Chloe from using Ethan as a financial weapon again. I felt a grim, resolute satisfaction. The justice building was complete. They had relied on my grief and weakness. They were met with my professional competence and unyielding resolve. The shock of the irrevocable trust signing and their forced eviction sent Chloe into a rage, and her desperate need for control led to a swift, poisonous counterstrike. This was the moment of extremely intense drama, where they tried to turn the tables. Chloe, realizing she could no longer access the principal, focused on destroying my reputation and seizing the income. She retained her own lawyer, who immediately filed a motion contesting the new trust, claiming I was acting under undue influence and emotional duress during a period of intense grief. Her lawyer argued that my sudden, complex financial restructuring was erratic behavior, using my recent widowhood to paint me as emotionally unstable and incapable of making sound financial decisions. But Chloe's most insidious move was personal. She began reaching out to Robert's oldest friends and distant relatives, using her sweet, polished facade to spread a malicious narrative. She claimed that I had become obsessed with control after Robert's death and was vindictively punishing Ethan because he and Robert were secretly planning to sell the commercial properties and move the family to Florida, a complete lie designed to justify my sudden actions. She subtly suggested that my lifelong focus on finance had led to an emotional breakdown, trying to portray me as the volatile one. She even claimed Ethan was protecting me from myself. Ethan, now staying in a cheap apartment and cut off from her financial lifeline, acted as her reluctant accomplice. He called me, his voice strained and pleading. "Mom, you have to stop. Chloe's lawyer is going to prove you're unstable. They'll freeze all the income. Just agree to revert the trust, and we can manage it together. Don't let your grief ruin you." His attempt to use my grief and my need for stability against me was a transparent attempt at gaslighting. My face tightened with cold anger. I knew their strategy weaponized my vulnerability to strip me of agency. They were trying to make the audience the judge, and the family believe that my professional competence was merely a cover for a frantic widow's breakdown. I looked at my phone, seeing Ethan's number flash, and felt a resolute calm. I would not engage in their emotional warfare. I had the voice recording, and I had the financial records. Their attack on my character only proved the truth of the conspiracy. I informed my lawyer, "We are not settling. We are playing the voice message in the discovery phase. Let them prove their financial stability while facing a charge of elder fraud." The tension was absolute, but I knew my final strike would be definitive. Chloe and Ethan's desperate legal maneuvers to claim undue influence and emotional distress on my part only gave me the perfect stage for the final strike. Their attempt to weaponize my grief and professional competence as erratic behavior was their greatest tactical mistake, as it necessitated a full disclosure of the evidence I possessed. The hearing was ostensibly about the motion to freeze the trust, but I knew it was the moment of ultimate exposure. I arrived in the courtroom with my entire financial life in binders, accompanied by Mr. Hayes and the senior partner. I was not there as a grieving widow, but as a meticulous financial expert fighting fraud. Mr. Hayes began by systematically dismantling their claims of my instability. He introduced documentation proving my history of complex financial management, demonstrating that the creation of a spendthrift trust was consistent with Robert's original wishes and my professional planning. My face remained calm, reflecting only professional competence. Then came the moment when the truth was exposed. The judge, looking skeptical about Chloe's claims, permitted the introduction of the audio evidence. The courtroom fell silent. Mr. Hayes played the voice message. Chloe's low, chilling whisper filled the room. "The old lady is finally signing the papers tomorrow. We're rich, baby. Just don't let her change her mind about the nursing home." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Chloe, who had maintained a facade of nervous piety, visibly flinched, her expression contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, no longer directed at me, but at the failed plan. Ethan, sitting next to her, buried his face in his hands, completely defeated. Mr. Hayes then presented the accompanying documentation, the notarized transcription of the voice message cross-referenced with the dates of the legal proceedings, proving their prior calculated intent. He argued, "Your Honor, the defendants claim Mrs. Peterson is acting under duress. We submit this evidence proving the duress and coercion were applied by the defendants to the plaintiff with the explicit felonious intent to institutionalize Mrs. Peterson and liquidate her assets for their own benefit." The judge looked at the evidence, then at the two defendants. Her gaze was cold and decisive. She immediately denied Chloe's motion to freeze the trust and issued a protective order against both Ethan and Chloe, barring them from contacting me regarding any financial matters and from entering my property. I looked at Chloe and Ethan one last time. Chloe's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw pure impotent rage, the rage of a manipulator, whose carefully crafted illusion has been irrevocably shattered. Ethan, still hiding his face, was a portrait of pathetic submission. I felt a surge of cold, final satisfaction. I had secured my financial future and ensured that they could never profit from my vulnerability. My professional skills had not only saved me, but had delivered a definitive, unassailable victory. The battle was over, and the integrity of Robert's legacy was preserved. The judge's ruling, denying Chloe's motion and issuing the protective order, was the sound of a jail door slamming shut on my son and daughter-in-law's greed. I won the legal battle decisively, not through emotional pleas, but through irrefutable, cold, hard evidence they themselves had provided. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a powerful, almost dizzying sense of victory. The initial rush was sheer satisfaction, the feeling that deserved justice had been served. I had defended Robert's legacy and my own life against a profound moral and financial attack. My professional skills, the very foundation of my career, had ultimately been my savior. But the triumph was immediately tempered by a deep, chilling grief. I had secured my assets, but I had lost my son. The moment I heard Chloe's voice confirming their plan to put me in a nursing home, I didn't just lose a daughter-in-law. I lost the illusion of who Ethan was, a protective son. That realization brought the profound sorrow of sadness for having raised a child only to be met with betrayal. The victory was expensive. It cost me the fundamental relationship of my life. I was safe, but I was utterly alone in my safety. However, this solitude was also the start of my liberation. For 6 months, I had been trapped in a state of dependent grief, allowing Chloe and Ethan to hover, manage, and ultimately plot against me. Now the space was empty. I realized that the greatest threat to my security had been my own vulnerability and my willingness to believe in the illusion of their care. With the threat legally removed, I felt a powerful sense of self-reliance I hadn't experienced since Robert died. I regained my life by making the difficult, necessary decision to prioritize my own survival over the pretense of a happy family unit. My first act of true self-liberation was simple. I changed the locks and the security codes one last time, making my house an impregnable fortress against any future intrusion, legal or emotional. I started working again, taking on small financial consulting projects. This wasn't for the money, the trust income was sufficient, but for the mental exercise and the reaffirmation of my competence. My hands were busy analyzing balance sheets, the very thing that reassured my anxious mind. I took the voice message, the ultimate evidence of betrayal, and framed the transcribed, notarized copy. I didn't hang it on the wall. I placed it in my personal safe. It was a physical reminder of the mandatory condition of my independence. Never again would I confuse sentiment with fiduciary duty. My emotions stabilized into a quiet, focused determination. I was no longer grieving the loss of Robert alone. I was recovering from the near-fatal trauma of betrayal. The realization that I was strong enough to face down this conspiracy, armed only with my intellect and professional integrity, was the true prize of the entire ordeal. The entire situation, though devastating, was the deserved wake-up call that forced me to reclaim control of my life and my destiny, proving that my identity as Martha the financial planner was far more resilient than Martha the grieving widow. The stillness of my home, now legally secured and free from the presence of Ethan and Chloe, brought no immediate peace. Instead, it magnified the profound internal conflict raging within me. I had won the legal war decisively, but I was constantly tortured by the question, was my swift total destruction of Ethan's financial future necessary? Did I prioritize the protection of Robert's money over the salvation of my son's soul? I often sat in Robert's study, staring at the empty chair. My face was etched with the strain of this internal debate, my expression oscillating between steely pride in my strategic victory and deep maternal sorrow. I had used the spendthrift trust, a tool designed to protect heirs from themselves, as a punitive weapon. I knew that by making Ethan financially dependent on a managed minimal income, I had effectively strangled any chance of him achieving genuine financial independence or personal growth. My lawyer called it brilliant foresight. My conscience called it emotional retribution. My internal conflict centered on the voice message. It was definitive proof of their intent, justifying my actions. But I wrestled with the fact that Ethan's whisper on the tape was barely audible. His role was secondary, fueled by Chloe's ambition. Had I allowed my deep-seated fear of helplessness, rooted in my childhood financial trauma, to turn me into an equally ruthless, if legally sanctioned, predator? I realized I hadn't just protected the assets. I had enforced my own absolute control over my son's life, a control I thought I had shed. My actions, while righteous, mirrored the very control I feared and despised. The thought that I might have been too harsh was constant. My professional training taught me that in cases of fraud, swift absolute isolation of the fraudulent party is mandatory. But Ethan was my son. I had failed to differentiate between necessary justice building and complete cold-hearted disowning. I should have offered him a path to repentance, a chance to leave Chloe and work to prove his trustworthiness. But the fear that he would use any vulnerability against me drove me to establish an unbreachable legal wall. My body language remained stiff and guarded a physical manifestation of the wall I built between us. I looked at my hands, the hands that signed the irreversible papers. My failure was not in detecting the plot, but in allowing my response to be purely intellectual and punitive, devoid of maternal warmth. My victory affirmed my professional capability, but highlighted my emotional failure. The truth was, I was so wounded by the thought of being placed in a nursing home, the ultimate symbol of lost control, that I had retaliated by placing Ethan in a financial prison. The mandatory condition for my future peace was clear. I had to find a way to reconcile my need for absolute security with the inherent human need for connection, even with a deeply flawed son. I had to learn how to live with the knowledge that my decisive action while saving my life had permanently fractured the only family I had left. The emotional cost of my victory was a heavy, persistent burden. The harsh reality of my solitary, secured existence forced a critical examination of my actions, propelling me toward resolution and genuine growth. The legal victory was complete, but the emotional ledger was deeply in the red. The primary task became navigating the relationship with Ethan, now that his betrayal was sealed by legal constraint. The biggest lesson I learned was about the nature of true security. My lifelong pursuit of stability led me to believe that money was the ultimate defense. Robert's death and Chloe's plot proved that excessive trust, fueled by my own grief-induced vulnerability, was the greatest threat. I realized my error wasn't creating the irrevocable trust that was necessary protection, but failing to address Ethan's profound moral passivity years ago. I had been so focused on managing his finances that I neglected his character. I learned that financial planning cannot fix fundamental moral flaws. My growth began with accepting that I could not save Ethan from himself, but I could save myself from his choices. My first decision to improve the relationship was to redefine our terms of engagement from legal to maternal, though highly constrained. I initiated contact not with an apology for the trust, which was non-negotiable, but with an acknowledgement of his suffering. I sent him a certified letter outlining the new rules. I will not discuss the principle of the trust nor Chloe. I will, however, pay for professional counseling for you unconditionally. I want you to manage your life with integrity regardless of the financial outcome. This was a difficult, unconditional commitment, offering emotional support without financial reward, forcing him to choose change based on internal desire, not external incentive. The emotional requirement was swallowing my pride and recognizing that even a failed son still needs a path back to self-respect. I established new, non-negotiable boundaries. The key was separating Ethan's personal well-being from his access to the estate. The trust stipulated that his income would be immediately diverted to a charity of my choice should he commingle funds with Chloe or attempt to contact me regarding the principal. This enforced boundary was a necessary guardrail, ensuring my safety. I focused my energy on my own life, commissioning a complete inventory of Robert's rare coin collection, a task that utilized my meticulous nature productively rather than punitively. However, in my resolute determination to avoid any perception of control, I made a profound error in decision-making. When Ethan and Chloe eventually filed for divorce, a predictable outcome fueled by their financial ruin, Ethan was utterly broken and severely depressed, facing financial destitution and legal fees. He called me weeping, not asking for money, but for temporary shelter and emotional reassurance. The mother in me screamed to help him to allow him back into the guest suite, but the strategic planner, terrified of the legal repercussions and the potential for Chloe to claim residency, insisted on the strict boundary of the protective order. I told him clinically that I would pay for a small temporary apartment and recommend a therapist, but he could not stay with me. My logic was, I must maintain absolute distance to preserve the spendthrift trust and avoid further legal attack. But the effect of this error in decision-making was cruel. I replaced maternal comfort with financial logistics, abandoning him at his lowest point. I prioritized the safety of the assets over the health of my child. My daughter-in-law Chloe was entirely out of the picture, yet I treated my son as though she were still standing right beside him. My body language during these calls was stiff, my expression guarded, terrified of slipping back into the role of the enabler. This painful realization was the final stage of my growth. I understood that the mandatory condition for my future peace was mastering the art of empathetic conditional support. I had to learn how to forgive his weakness without rewarding his betrayal. I realized I could have offered him shelter outside the house, perhaps renting a temporary separate unit in my name, and still maintained legal distance. True strength was not in building walls, but in building bridges back to sanity and self-respect, even if those bridges had strict weight limits. The battle for the house was over, but the war for my soul, the fight to remain a loving mother while being a vigilant protector, was still ongoing. If there is one absolute non-negotiable lesson I want to share with you, the viewer, especially those of you managing aging assets and adult children in the American legal landscape, it is that your competency is your greatest asset and your vulnerability is your greatest liability. My story is a chilling case study in how the emotional trauma of loss grief can be weaponized by the very people you trust, underscoring the vital need for legal foresight. First, let's address legal boundaries and trust. As a financial planner, I knew the risks, yet I let my grief, my vulnerability dictate my actions. I allowed Ethan and Chloe into my home, blurring the line between emotional support and financial access. The primary moral truth here is that filial love must never replace legal protection. My son's betrayal was absolute proof that when significant assets are involved, the principle of trust must be backed by the ironclad security of legal documentation. For the audience, if you are widowed, if you are ill, or if you are simply aging, you must establish an irrevocable trust or similarly strict legal instrument that cannot be easily overturned or accessed by an opportunistic relative. This mandatory condition is not an act of distrust. It is an act of self-preservation. Do not rely on your children's presumed goodness. Rely on the law. Second, the danger of passivity and ambition. Ethan's character flaw was his passive compliance, a weakness that made him the perfect vehicle for Chloe's calculated ambition. I learned that passivity is a form of moral failure. For years, I enabled his weakness by managing his life. When I stopped, he immediately attached himself to Chloe, who offered him the structure and the reward he craved. My ultimate error was in creating the fertile ground for his betrayal. For the audience, do not enable your adult children's dependency. The unconditional commitment of a parent must be to foster independence and strength of character, even if it leads to friction. Had Ethan been financially and morally strong, he would have fiercely protected me. Instead, he sold me out. Third, the cost of absolute control. While my use of the voice message and the irrevocable trust was necessary for justice, building my subsequent refusal to offer Ethan emotional comfort, the no shelter rule was an act of emotional retribution, driven by my own fear of losing control again. I won the legal war, but risked losing the moral one. My growth came from realizing that you can maintain an absolute legal boundary while extending compassion. The resolution for the audience is this: fight with the strength of a financial expert to secure your independence. But once the fight is over, approach the aftermath with the empathy of a human being. The goal is to maintain your stability, not to inflict perpetual punishment. My final difficult task is learning to offer Ethan a path back to self-respect, a safe landing space for him to rebuild his character without giving him the keys to the kingdom. My story should serve as a wake-up call. Your family may be lovely, but where there is significant wealth and vulnerability, you must always think like a financial planner. Protect your assets, establish clear boundaries, and never ever allow yourself to become too dependent, not even on your own flesh and blood. That liberation comes not from their trustworthiness, but from your own absolute self-reliance. So that is the shocking, painful truth of how a simple voice message saved me from financial ruin and a nursing home. It taught me that while I cannot erase the betrayal, I can control the outcome and secure my hard-won independence. I am safe, the trust is intact, and I am focused on my life, redefined by strength and vigilance. I want to know what you think. Given that Chloe and Ethan's plan was clear, calculated fraud, did I go too far by restructuring the entire estate into an irrevocable spendthrift trust, essentially cutting off direct access to the principal forever? Or was that the only effective way to protect myself? Have you ever had to choose between protecting your assets and maintaining a relationship with a betraying child? Drop your thoughts, comments, and your own experiences in the section below. I'm reading and responding, seeking the wisdom of this community. If this story helped you understand the critical need for estate planning and legal boundaries, or if you appreciate the frank honesty of the mother-in-law perspective, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next video, where I reveal the surprising interaction I had with Chloe's mother after the divorce. Thank you for sharing in my journey toward honest independence. Until next time, be vigilant, be strong, and secure your future.